Everyone's talking, whispering, pointing, buzzing, because you've become known as the one who speaks truth without flinching, the one who stands up for those who can't stand for themselves. But it's not just your courage that unsettles those in power, it's the way your fearlessness sparks something in others. You've created a ripple effect, turning scattered resistance into a rising wave of collective strength. One voice became many. Now the noise can't be ignored. You've become the standard, the one people reference and say, that's how it's done. And that's exactly why the conversation keeps circling back to you. Masks fall in your presence. The fake smiles, the polished charm, the feigned concern. They all fracture the moment you step into the room. Voices shift, postures change. And suddenly, they're not performing for power. They're performing out of fear that you see too much. And you do. You always do. You read between the lines. You notice the cracks in their words. You know when kindness is a disguise. You can feel when authority is a weapon. You never ignore silent cruelty. You don't accept manipulation, even when it's dressed in influence or disguised as grace. You speak the truths others avoid, and that's why they look away. Change the subject, or rewrite the story before you can open your mouth. Because once you do, the illusion collapses. You've brought truth to places where silence was once a survival tactic. You've made people uncomfortable, not by attacking, but by refusing to play along. And maybe you don't even realize it yet, but your refusal is loud. It's rebellion in its purest form. You are the pause that makes people think. You are the mirror that reflects what others try to hide. You're not trying to be the disruption. You are the disruption. You're the wave. Your truth moves through people like a current, stirring, shaking, waking. Some pretend it didn't touch them, but deep down they've shifted. They feel seen, even exposed. Because you didn't come in with an agenda. You came in with clarity. And in a world addicted to distortion, clarity is the most dangerous thing there is. They fear your eyes, not because they intimidate, but because they reveal that you are not fooled. They fear your silence, not because it hides ignorance, but because it holds strategy. You see, you listen, you calculate, and that's what makes your presence unforgettable. And when you finally speak, it's not to cause harm, it's to expose truth. And that's exactly what shakes them. You don't raise your voice to demand attention. You speak with a presence that lingers, with truth that lodges itself into people's hearts. Because once the truth is felt, it can never be unfelt. They'll call it drama, they'll label it tension, but what you bring into the room is justice, in its most unfiltered form. Uncomfortable, undeniable, and absolutely necessary. You never asked to be a protector, yet you became one the moment you chose not to look away. While others turned their backs on injustice, you stepped directly into the fire. Where others denied what was in front of them, you locked eyes with the truth and stood tall. You didn't just speak up, you took a stand, and in doing so, you changed the entire atmosphere. Because some people aren't really afraid of lies, they're terrified of what happens when someone dares to call them out, and you did. You've stood in spaces where injustice wore the costume of politeness. You've heard cruelty dressed up as humor, disrespect erred in tone, and manipulation softened by fake apologies, and while others let it slide, you didn't. Maybe you didn't raise your voice. Maybe you didn't need to. Your words, sharpened by clarity and grounded in purpose, cut through the noise with surgical precision. You didn't make it about personal vengeance, you made it about truth. In your workplace, you checked a supervisor who mistook their title for a free pass to dehumanize others. In your family, you stopped the relative who habitually crossed boundaries and laughed it off as harmless. In your friend group, you spoke up for the person everyone else left behind. You drew the line that no one else was brave enough to draw, and when you did, everything changed. You made enemies, not because you were cruel but because you were right, and they couldn't hide from it. Some of these people had lived their whole lives without ever being held accountable. Your presence was the end of that immunity. You weren't aggressive, you weren't emotional, you were accurate, and that's why it hurt. That's why they're still talking. That's why even now, someone flinches at the sound of your name. Not because you were wrong, but because you were honest, and they hated how clearly you exposed the truth. There are people out there still trying to twist the story, still trying to paint you as the villain, but deep down they know the truth. You weren't fighting for yourself, you were fighting for someone who couldn't, and that's a kind of strength they'll never be able to comprehend. What they didn't anticipate was how many people were silently grateful for you. People who had no idea how to speak up. People who thought no one would ever defend them, but you did, and you did it without needing credit, without asking for applause. You acted, and in doing so, you gave others permission to believe they could too. They deserve better too. You're not some rebel without direction. You are a force with a purpose. You don't stir up conflict for attention. You step into imbalance to restore what's been lost. No matter how they try to distort your intentions or mislabel your courage, the truth remains. Your impact is real. You may not have set out to change the world, but you changed someone's world. And in a society that often erases those who defend the voiceless, your voice continues to echo, louder than the silence they hoped would drown you out. But let's pause for just a second. Are you really chosen? Then prove it. Because being chosen isn't about labels, it's about standing firm when everything tells you to sit down. Your words carry weight, because your presence carries consequence. People feel it, the shift that happens when you enter a space. The energy changes. You are disruptive in the most necessary way, and that disruption is exactly why they fear you. They fear you because you can't be bought, because you're not moved by applause or intimidated by disapproval. You aren't dazzled by charm or manipulated by guilt. You don't bend your values to make others comfortable. And that's what makes you dangerous to them, because when someone with principles refuses to be predictable, it rattles the very foundations they rely on to stay in control. They can't anticipate your next move. All they know is that when you speak, people begin to question what they were told to accept. You ask one honest question, and suddenly the silence begins to crumble. You reject one injustice, and others start finding their voice too. You don't just inspire change, you provoke it. You make people believe they aren't powerless, and nothing threatens a system built on fear more than the rise of courage. Because of you, the shadows aren't as safe anymore. It's harder for them to pretend that control is earned instead of imposed. It's harder to convince the world that silence equals safety when your presence shows otherwise. Now people are paying attention. They're noticing what they used to miss. They're connecting dots they used to ignore, and they're speaking up. That's not luck. That's your influence in action. They underestimated you. They thought if they dismissed you long enough, you'd fade away. If they mocked or misrepresented you, others would follow their lead. But the opposite happened. People leaned in. They listened. They respected you more, because real integrity doesn't beg to be noticed. It commands it. And yours? It's undeniable. So they've started calling you a problem, not because it's true, but because it distracts from the fact that you've been the solution all along. They say you're too much, because your presence exposes how little they've done. They accuse you of arrogance to avoid admitting that you simply refuse to play small. But deep down, they know the truth. Your power isn't loud, it's pure. It doesn't seek attention, it creates awareness. It cuts through the noise and wakes people up. That's why they whisper your name when they think you're not listening. You didn't ask to lead. You didn't demand a spotlight. You simply refused to bend, and that made you unshakable. Now, whether they like it or not, they're forced to reckon with the possibility. You've unlocked a world where power is held accountable to truth. Not the other way around. This isn't just your personality, and it's not something you merely learned over time. What flows through you is divine, crafted with intention, the way you instinctively spot the fractures in systems others praise as polished, the way your soul recoils at injustices others have long accepted as normal. That's not random, that's a gift. You were born to disrupt. You were made to unsettle the foundations of power that have stood unchallenged for far too long. You weren't built to fit in. You were wired to question, to confront what's been blindly accepted for generations. You feel it, don't you? That tension inside when silence becomes complicity. That spiritual ache when manipulation masquerades as leadership. That fire that erupts in your chest when someone's dignity is crushed under the weight of polite oppression. While others walk away, you stay, not because it's easy, but because your spirit refuses to abandon the truth. That's not just defiance. That's a divine calling. You're not simply intuitive, you're a spiritual whistleblower. You were sent to illuminate rooms where darkness has been left undisturbed for years. You notice what others ignore. You speak what others fear to name, and when backlash arrives, as it always does, you withstand it with a strength even you sometimes struggle to explain. That's not luck, that's divine protection. You are shielded by something higher than status, stronger than public opinion. You didn't ask for these battles, but they keep finding you, not because you're confrontational, but because your very presence reveals what's broken. Every time you speak, every time you take a stand, the invisible becomes visible. You've shaken structures simply by refusing to pretend. And let's be clear, the attacks against you have never been random. The rumors, the slander, the attempts to isolate you, these are signs that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. People don't attack what poses no threat. They come for you because you disrupt the fear-based foundations they've built their power upon. Your courage makes their cowardice impossible to ignore. Your presence presses on the places they've buried deep. You've exposed lies without uttering a word, just by not playing along. You've disrupted systems by standing firm in your truth. And whether or not the world ever gives you credit for it, the shift has already begun. People are thinking differently because of you. They're making new choices because of what you've modeled with your stand. You didn't sign up for this role, but God saw something in you that could carry it. Something steady, something holy. That's why the path feels heavy. That's why you feel set apart, because you weren't just sent here to comfort the wounded. You were sent to confront the wounders, to sound the alarm, to shake the ground beneath the feet of those who've thrived on injustice. And that's exactly what you're doing. They tried to reduce you, calling you dramatic, difficult, rebellious, not because it was true, but because it was easier than looking at themselves. If they could turn you into the problem, they wouldn't have to face the gatekeeping, the manipulation, the harm they've caused in secret. They thought they could tarnish your name to silence your message. But truth doesn't require a perfect messenger, and your truth, it carried. They tried to isolate you, whisper behind your back, stretch distance between you and others. They painted you as unstable just because you stopped accepting the unacceptable. And still, you didn't crumble, you didn't run. You stood your ground while they scrambled to preserve their illusion. And that's what haunts them, the realization that you never needed a crowd to be powerful. You never needed noise to be heard. You stood in your truth. And that was enough. They had no idea how much you were holding back. They thought your silence meant surrender, that your stillness was weakness. What they didn't realize was that you were observing, absorbing, calculating every move. You weren't quiet because you were defeated. You were quiet because you were sharpening your truth, like a blade. And when you finally chose to speak, it wasn't out of anger, it was out of purpose. Your words didn't come to wound, they came to awaken. And the moment you let them fly, it was as if the air shifted. Your truth was so piercing, so unapologetically clear, that it left no room for denial. They couldn't talk their way out of it. They couldn't hide behind charm or title. All they could do was panic, because they had no defense for clarity that deep. You were never seeking attention. You weren't here to provoke drama. That's their language, not yours. You're not about destruction. You're about revelation. You shine a light on what they've tried to keep hidden. And what makes it even more powerful is that every attempt to silence you has only made your voice louder. Every time they pushed you into the background, more people started to lean in, because in trying to erase you, they exposed just how necessary your presence really is. They made your influence impossible to ignore. Your truth became louder than their noise, more real than their illusion. Let them gossip. Let them twist your intentions. The people who truly matter, the ones with eyes to see and ears to hear, they already know what you stand for. And the quiet ones, the ones who never said a word, they've been watching. They felt something shift because of you. And even if they haven't told you yet, they're grateful. Because when you finally spoke, you didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for every silenced voice. You didn't just break a silence, you broke a pattern. You shattered a cycle. You exposed a system built on fear and silence. And once that system cracked, people started to wake up. And now, no matter what they do, no matter how they spin the story, they cannot unhear you. You've already planted seeds that will continue to grow. You never asked to lead. You didn't raise your hand and say, "Look at me." You weren't seeking followers or chasing applause. But the truth has a way of drawing people in. Realness attracts. Integrity commands respect. Leadership doesn't begin with ambition. It begins with action. And your actions have spoken louder than any speech ever could. Every time you stood firm in the face of discomfort, someone else found their footing. Every time you told the truth in a room full of lies, someone else found the courage to stop lying to themselves. You didn't walk toward the spotlight, it found you. And now, it's undeniable, you are being called to lead, not through titles or loud declarations, but through presence, through truth, through the way you live your life. You lead in the way you carry yourself, rooted, grounded, unshaken, in the way you say no, not out of rebellion, but out of self-respect. In how you set boundaries, not as walls, but as shields of sacred protection. You walk into rooms with a presence that cannot be ignored. Your back is straight, your spirit steady, your convictions unshaken by opinion. Your strength doesn't shout, it radiates. And that quiet power speaks louder than noise ever could. You rattle people, not because you attack them, but because you remind them of what they've forgotten in themselves. You mirror back the truth they've buried, and that kind of reflection is uncomfortable, but necessary. People are watching you more than you realize. The ones who act like they're not paying attention, they're quoting you when you're not in the room. The ones who dismiss you publicly, they're privately trying to figure out how you do what you do. They study your presence, your confidence, your clarity. You're teaching without even trying, you're leading without ever demanding. And that's exactly why your influence runs so deep. It's rooted in truth, not performance. This chapter of your life isn't asking for perfection, it's asking for boldness. Real, raw, unfiltered boldness. You're being placed in rooms you didn't ask to enter. You're being handed opportunities you never lobbied for. You're being positioned in front of people who once ignored you, because now they can't look away. You're being asked to speak up about things you never imagined you'd have to confront. But here's the truth. Your life has already become a living blueprint. Your experiences, your choices, your scars, your healing, they're not just for you. They are guiding someone else through their darkest hour. Your story has become their survival guide. Someone out there is holding on to your words like a lifeline. And yes, not everyone will like that. Some will envy the power in your voice. Others will resent the attention you're receiving. They'll try to reduce you, mislabel you, question your motives. But none of that changes what's real. Your impact is undeniable. Your voice is necessary. Your leadership is rising. And they can either watch it, learn from it, or be left behind by it. But what they can't do is stop it. They'll try to call it arrogance. They'll say it's just luck. But deep down, in the quiet corners of their minds where their truth whispers back to them, they know exactly what it is: alignment. You have aligned with something greater than yourself, something sacred, something unshakable, and that kind of alignment doesn't just elevate you, it confronts everyone who crosses your path. It awakens something in people, whether they're ready for it or not. Your presence forces awareness. It exposes the places in others where they've been hiding, pretending, shrinking. That's why you unsettle them. That's why they react. Not because you're doing too much, but because your energy reminds them of everything they're not doing. You never set out to build a following. You weren't chasing influence. All you ever wanted was the freedom to be real, to speak your truth, live your values, and walk your path with integrity. But in choosing authenticity over acceptance, and choosing truth over popularity, you became a leader anyway. Not because you claimed the title, but because people saw in you what they couldn't find in themselves. They saw strength that doesn't waver under pressure. They saw integrity that doesn't bend for approval. They saw conviction that doesn't change with the crowd. And in seeing you, they realized something they'd long forgotten. It's possible to be powerful without compromising your soul. That's what terrifies your critics the most. You are proof that true power doesn't have to come from manipulation or control. It can come from alignment, clarity, and purpose. You're not leading for applause. You're not here to be liked. You're here because you know what it feels like to stand alone, to hold values in spaces where values are mocked. You know what it's like to feel the sting of isolation when you refuse to conform. And yet you kept standing. You kept speaking, because if your courage can help even one more person rise, if your truth can ignite even one more soul into being their own, then every uncomfortable moment has been worth it. You didn't ask for this position, but now that it's here, you carry it with fire in your heart and unwavering truth on your tongue. You're not just walking your own path, you're clearing the way for others to walk theirs. You're removing the brambles, lighting the trail, and showing others that it's possible to walk with both strength and compassion. And yes, the whispers continue, the side eyes linger, the rumors multiply, but none of it matters, because with every lie they speak, with every distorted story they tell, they prove something they never intended to admit, that your light is reaching places they thought were impenetrable. You're not the problem. They are reacting to a power they never thought you'd have the courage to claim. You don't need to defend your name in rooms that were never meant for your truth in the first place. You don't owe clarity to those committed to misunderstanding you, because your truth walks ahead of you. It lingers in the spaces you leave behind. It speaks for you when your lips are still, and that truth, it's louder than their gossip, more piercing than their projections, more lasting than their noise. You're not feared because you're reckless. You're feared because you're righteous. Because you cannot be bought, silenced, or manipulated into playing small. You don't perform. You don't pretend. You simply are. And that threatens everything built on performance and illusion. You reflect back what others are trying to hide. You shine light on what they've spent years covering in shadows. You didn't have to raise your voice to shake them. Your truth did that all on its own. You make people face themselves, and that's why they gossip. Not because they're confused, but because they're convicted. They hoped their words would ruin you. Instead, they only revealed your power. Every rumor they started, every warning they whispered behind closed doors, every attempt to discredit you, it all became fuel. They built your legend without even realizing it. You became someone worth watching, worth whispering about, worth trying to silence. But what they never understood is this. You don't run from conflict. You don't cower when things get uncomfortable. You don't bend under pressure. You stand still, solid, unshaken. And when you stand in truth, the truth becomes the loudest sound in the room. So let them talk. Let them burn themselves out trying to box you in. trying to name something they'll never fully understand. You've already won, not by shouting, not by fighting, but by standing, unshaken, unapologetic, unmistakably real. You didn't seek out power, but you were given authority, the kind that doesn't need permission to exist, the kind that can't be stolen, only recognized, and that's why they fear you, not because you're loud, but because your presence makes their lies unravel, because when you walk in truth, masks slip and illusions crack. You became a force without trying, a leader without a title, a storm that shook the sky just by being still. Now they talk, because they see what you've awakened. They feel what you've stirred. You've disrupted the narrative. You've exposed the rot. You've made silence dangerous and truth contagious. Keep showing up. Keep speaking with clarity. Keep defending those who can't yet defend themselves, because your name now carries weight. And the ones who once tried to bury you in silence, they're being buried by the noise of their own unraveling. All you had to do was be who you are. That's all for today, dear Father. I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work,